All right, I think we're live. If I
I think
read
so
the
too.
welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Greenberg. Want to welcome everybody to our election day streaming from the Committee of 70. So we're thrilled to have another very informed guest who will help us talk about some really interesting and important topics in both the election world and cyber worlds. My name is Jeff Greenberg. I am a senior advisor on election administration with the Committee of 70. And my guest today is Beth Schwanke, the executive director of the University of Pittsburgh's Institute for Cyber Law, Policy and Security. And she is joining us today to talk through a little bit about how cybersecurity intersects with elections. So we're going to talk about some of those issues today. And Beth, welcome. I don't know if
Thank
you wanted to
you.
say anything or introduce or if any more details as far as yourself. I would certainly open the floor for you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. You guys have such a great lineup today. This is really great programming. I'm so pleased to be a part of it. The one thing I will add to your introduction that I think might be of interest to folks is that several years ago, Pitt Cyber hosted the Blue Ribbon Commission on Pennsylvania's election security. So it has been several years now that Pitt Cyber has been looking really closely at this issue. So I'm really glad that we get to discuss it today. And happy election day, by the way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So things are relatively quiet so far, except for one county that I've heard so far. So hopefully keep our fingers crossed that the day proceeds relatively quietly in Pennsylvania. So let's jump into our questions. Cybersecurity is extremely important when it comes to ensuring the integrity of our elections. What are some of the measures in place in Pennsylvania that can help us be confident in the security of our vote?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first let's acknowledge that cybersecurity is only one aspect of election security as a whole, right? Cybersecurity, protecting systems from digital attacks, is also deeply integrated with physical security, with information security, and all of the other measures we have in place to help ensure the integrity of each of our votes and the entire election administration process. So I will say that one of my favorite resources about our election security here in Pennsylvania is an infographic that Committee of 70, led by you, Jeff, and Pitt Cyber created together for the 2022 elections. So I think I can't pop the link in the chat because it won't then show up in streaming. But if you go to Pitt Cyber's website, it's in the election security section, and it really provides a great overview of the key aspects of Pennsylvania's election security, including cybersecurity at every stage of election administration, because it is really complicated, right? As you really
Absolutely.
well know. But let's take a second and focus on cybersecurity specifically. So first, all voting equipment in Pennsylvania has successfully completed penetration testing, access control testing, and other testing to ensure that every piece of software and firmware is protected from tampering. All of the equipment is certified by both the U.S. Election Assistance Commission and the Pennsylvania Department of State, no matter which of our 67 counties in Pennsylvania you're in. And another really important thing to know about our cybersecurity, and something where there's sometimes a lot of bad information floating around about, is that no voting machines or tabulators in Pennsylvania are connected to the internet. And then finally, I would just note that Pennsylvania counties and the Department of State are also following cybersecurity best practices. These help improve our cyber defenses. This includes constant network monitoring, firewalls, encryption, vulnerability assessments, and so on. And so I think everyone can really be confident that our elections have multi-layered defenses and security protocols, from voter registration databases all the way through tabulation and then post-election audits. Really, layers of security are built into our election process: chains of custody, access control systems, logs, auditing. Our election officials are securing each part of the process. But I'm going to tell you about our best cybersecurity defense. It's actually, are you ready? Paper. So it is actually paper. right? The most significant thing that Pennsylvania has done to ensure the security of each of our votes in the past few years is that we've replaced those older electronic voting systems with systems that have voter verifiable paper records. This means that the system you vote on provides a paper record that you, the voter, can verify, and it can be audited. So election workers can check the paper records against electronic vote totals to confirm that the voting machines are working as intended. And that Blue Ribbon Commission I mentioned, this is something that our bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission on Pennsylvania's election security recommended several years ago as the most important thing, the number one thing that Pennsylvania could do to make its elections more secure. And Pennsylvania's done it. So yeah.
I love that breakdown, Beth. And I've been involved in elections, and you're making me feel more confident just by hearing you say all those steps one after the other. To me, I think it just prompts the idea that how important it is for us as folks who have this understanding and knowledge to get that information out to the average resident in Pennsylvania. I think that's so helpful. So no, I love that breakdown on every step of the process. So thank you. In recent elections, there's been a lot of confusing information and false information about Pennsylvania elections. I just saw it again this week on some national network again, repeating something that wasn't accurate about our 2020 election. Do you have advice for those of us who want to make sure that we are seeing and in incorporating or using accurate information?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Pitt Cyber, we actually have a disinformation lab. And so we look at this a lot, right? And we're all aware that there have been false accusations or also just information that's really unintentionally misleading about Pennsylvania's election security in the recent past. Because as you know, as I know, as anyone who has worked in this knows, it's really complicated. And so it is easy for there to be false information floating around and for bad actors to really exploit that bad information. So I will say, I do not expect to see much false information about Pennsylvania's vote during this election cycle. However, there is going to be some, absolutely, unfortunately. I think, as you mentioned, we can all just hope it won't get much oxygen, especially as more people learn about the election administration process and the many reasons we have to be confident in it. But to your question about like, what should we be doing to make sure that we're seeing accurate information and not sharing bad information? So the first thing as individuals that I think we can all be aware of is the fact that elections are a time when there's a lot of bad information out there. I don't even think about information in this space as kind of misinformation or disinformation anymore. There's just a lot of like information pollution, right? Like there is just a lot of junk. And it can be really hard to find the good information and to know what useful good information even is. So here at the Pitt Disinformation Lab, what we start to see is false claims that are being recycled from other elections, sometimes with a bit of updating. Sometimes they don't even bother to update it, or like you'll realize that like they say they're talking about a Pennsylvania election, but it's actually a video from like Ukraine or something. Like sometimes it's not even very good. But it scares us and it makes us angry. So of course we, the like filter in our brain to is this right kind of turns off. But and the other thing, right, innocent events quickly get spun up into misleading claims and then they become viral false information.
Yeah.
And a lot of the cues we have for identifying accurate information sources with appropriate accountability standards are really warped online. So it is hard to know like what's true, what isn't true, especially when we see people we know and therefore tend to trust sharing information. So what I do around election day is I try to be really careful in how I engage, and especially online. When I see something on social media or from other commentators like podcasters or talk radio or kind of like opinion TV, that is about the election, and really, if it provokes like a strong emotional response in me, like if I'm angry or scared or something to that effect, I really try to take a beat. I pause, and I absolutely do not reshare the information. And then I look at the information, I look at the source. Where is it coming from? Has that source shared misinformation in the past? Has it been information that was fact checked by like a really good news organization like the AP or Reuters? And has it been found incorrect? Where was the information they're sharing from originally? Who else is sharing it? Are large news organizations sharing the information? And then for election information, I really do look mostly to the Pennsylvania Department of State, to my local board of elections, and then news organizations like the AP, like the Associated Press, and then our local papers, right, which are great, like the Philly Inquirer, Spotlight PA, Post Gazette, etc. So news organizations with established accountability practices. And of course, like I also trust organizations like Committee of 70 and some of these organizations that have this really long bipartisan track record of providing and sharing accurate information. And I really try not to reshare anything on social media about elections that isn't from the Pennsylvania Department of State or my county election office or kind of some of those sources that we've talked about. And I actually think that as individuals, which I know this is deeply unsatisfying, but that is one of the most important things we can do.
It's funny because the conversation kind of prompts an old story just to show you how far we have come in the disinformation and misinformation world from my days as an election official more than 10 years ago. The biggest thing I ran into back in the day was some guy posting on Facebook one election that because it was raining, the polls were not going to open that day. And I blew my top just on something. It's like you felt like that was so nonsensical that nobody would believe it. But as an election official, you had to respond. Went to the local media, reached out to the person who posted it. You need to better get this down right away. But like those days, I'm sure our elections officials would welcome now if that was the worst thing they were seeing was somebody saying it was raining on election day and the polls were closed. But now it's so difficult for elections officials to always have to monitor and push back. So it is important for outside organizations and others to try to help maintain that wall, so to speak.
Exactly, especially trusted organizations like Committee of 70. And I'll say, your example is the perfect one about how these false narratives are recycled. We see false narratives like, oh, the polls are closed all the time. If you see someone posting that polls are closed or trying to drive you away from voting in some way, I would have significant doubts and go to your county election website and check on that. I can't even fathom the circumstances in which that would happen. So if you see information like that, chances are it is bad information. Be highly skeptical. Go try to vote.
Great. That's a great point. I'm going to skip our next question because I think you pretty much answered a good
Yeah.
part of that. Does that make sense? And I think we have time for maybe one or two more at the most here. I wanted to try to pick out some. Let's see if we can get maybe something election specific. What would you say? So this one is really interesting. What strategies and technologies are being employed to detect and mitigate cybersecurity threats in elections?
Okay. So that's a great question. I mean, I will say that cybersecurity doesn't start on election day, right? It is 365 days a year. It is a 24/7 approach to election security. And Pennsylvania really has multi-layered defenses on every aspect from our elections. And again, like one of our best cybersecurity defenses is in fact paper. So those new voting systems that we've had in place for the last few elections are really one of our most important things. But there's also all sorts of monitoring going on, really important information sharing with law enforcement, with election officials, with federal agencies that are monitoring some of these cybersecurity threats. Are very aware of them and they're very concerned about them, and are doing everything in their power to defend against them. And the good thing to know, right, is like we do have this system of defenses that is in fact multi-layered. There are so many checks and balances and accountability measures in place that we can be really confident in the integrity of our elections.
Well, thank you. I think that's probably going to do it for us today. So, Beth, what a great conversation. I love this type of information. I'd love to see it we get it out a little bit more in the future. So we have a great partnership and a collaboration right now. So looking forward to continuing that in the future and continuing to help voters and residents of Pennsylvania from both sides of the Commonwealth. So happy to be on the western side with you, though. So I'll brag a little bit there. But thank you so much. Any final words or anything that you'd like to say before we leave?
Well, I'll just say thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to talk with you. And anyone who hasn't voted yet, please go vote.
Including me. I got to go this afternoon.
Bye,
Thank you
Jeff.
so much, Beth. Have a great day. Thank
You
you.
too.